What do you buy when you go to a feminist bookstore owned by a person of color? You buy feminist books written by people of color. Femfire Books is a feminist bookstore in Jacksonville, Florida. It's a tiny shop that's on this street of other little businesses. It's a very cute avenue that have like pet stores and other little trinket shops. It's a really nice place. I would feel like to spend a weekend. And because it's a smaller shop, it is very, very particularly curated. When I say that it's a feminist bookstore, it is a feminist bookstore. And all of the books there are of a particular topic that might be of interest to somebody who identifies as a feminist or wants to read more feminist lit. So what does that mean? There are things that are particularly addressing feminism, but it's also highlighting marginalized voices in general. People of color, different ethnicities, different sexual orientations. What else? An adorable kid section. There's a really large kind of sociology type section. I don't know how many books I wanted to take with me. I definitely bought a lot of them. Now, I will say this. The one thing that I didn't do that I feel like in retrospect I definitely should have done was ask for recommendations. I mean, this place is so hyper curated that I feel like everything was probably a recommendation, but even still, I didn't ask. It's my bad, guys. I screwed the pooch on that one. By the way, I'm Amanda. This is Most Bookish, and here we just talk about all the books from all the interesting places that I go to. I feel like for the most part, we talk about interesting topics, interesting books, interesting to me because this is my channel. And I hope that you find it interesting too. And if you do, then like and subscribe. I'm waiting. Okay, you're back. So I got these 5 books. I got 5 feminist books, and I have to tell you, there's a very particular experience that can happen in, let's say, a feminist bookstore or a bookstore that is hyper-focused on a certain worldview. And that is that books that discuss different topics that aren't in the mainstream, or if they are in the mainstream, they're not popular open topics for discussion. So like for instance, pro-life, pro-choice is in the mainstream all the time. It's been politicized out the ears, and there's always somebody talking about something legislatively that's going on with abortion care, horror stories coming from some of these states that have basically fully made it illegal following the Roe v. Wade decision or the dismantling of Roe v. Wade. However, there's not a lot of open conversation about abortion itself, like the abortion story, people in particular talking about their story, which is sad, but also it results kind of in a one-sided story of this very multifaceted topic. The same thing you can argue with people of different backgrounds. Let's say, for instance, Asians, right? Because we're in this country and we're not a majority Asian country, a lot of the conversations that you see in your popular social sphere, if they are related to Asian people, are more about news items, things about Asian people versus stories of Asian people. When you go to a kind of feminist bookstore or a bookstore that highlights things outside of the popular, you get to hear way more voices that are interested in speaking to topics that you might have never heard of or that you might not have thought of. Like, for instance, one of the books that I have is called Demystifying Sharia, which might sound a little bit unknown right now because we're not in the news cycle where Sharia, anti-Sharia laws were popping up all over the United States. But going back into the Obama administration, the end of the Obama administration, there was like Sharia fear all over the place. And now that it's again out of the news, it's not a popular thing. However, I remember that time, and I remember so much of what's in the news is a conversation about like something that happened or whatever the sensationalized thing is, but very rarely do they explain the background of the thing that they're talking about, right? So if you're talking about hate crime, a hate crime was committed, they focus on and sensationalize the hate crime, but they don't talk about, if it's a hate crime committed by a Christian and they're noting that because the person used, Christian rhetoric in their hate crime, they're not describing what does Christianity mean? What is the tradition of whatever? I mean, obviously it's a news cycle and you want to kind of capture somebody's attention really quickly and then move on to the next thing, but sometimes the context is very missing. thing. And if you limit yourself to getting your information from those spaces, then you're missing out on a lot of context. And what I like about these kind of hyper-focused bookstores, when I go into a space like that, I'm like, oh, I want to know more about that. I want to know more about that. I didn't even think about that. I had no idea about that. So this has a tendency to happen in those spaces. I want to know more about Sharia. Explain that to me, because I don't understand what the hell these people are talking about. I don't understand the history of abortion in this country, even though I'm a woman, and I know plenty of people who've had them, because 1 in 4 women have one. So somebody you know has. I also happen to be in Jacksonville on a road trip, which means I drove there, which means I could take home as many books as I wanted. These 5 are the ones that I'm talking about because I feel like they were so good at introducing an interesting topic that I wanted to learn about. But more importantly, I feel like they are all introductory feminist works that will help somebody understand a very popular feminist conversation that's happening right now and has happened, and that actually has developed further since some of these books were written. Also, I picked up a little fiction book that was a sapphic YA story, so I included that too. All right, we're going to start with, what do we want to start with? Intro? Do we want to start with Intro to Racism? Do we want to start with Intro to Immigration / Intro to Islam? Do we want to do Intro to Abortion? Do we want to do Intro to Spell Making? Or do we just want a simple story about a witch and a vampire? All right, we're going to get wild. Let's just do Intro to Abortion. I also have to tell you that a couple of the book titles in this stack are phenomenal. This one is You're the Only One I've Told, Stories Behind Abortion. It is by Dr. Mira Shah. Dr. Mira Shah is, or at the time of this writing, was the chief medical officer for Planned Parenthood, and she had been an abortion provider for many years before the writing of this book, because it's nonfiction. I'm not sure if she's still their CMO. She also provided family planning and other health services, as a lot of abortion providers do, as Planned Parenthood does. This book is basically a compilation of a lot of people's abortion stories. So Dr. Shah writes the introduction, and there's a lot about the history of abortion, and this is in the United States because she's a United States author and it references the United States. This was also written before the dismantling of Roe v. Wade. So that's an interesting thing. What this would have looked like today, completely different book. And however, interestingly enough, the stories start in the 1970s, before abortion was legal in every state, back before Roe v. Wade. And it talks about the difficulties of being able to obtain an abortion. And it's very much the status of what we have today, because before Roe v. Wade, there were states in which abortion was legal. It just wasn't all of them. So you would have to travel and all this stuff. But the difference between the 1970s and now is that abortion had not become politicized. It just wasn't a fundamental right, and it was kind of ignored. And the whole protesting at an abortion clinic and attacking doctors and using it as your campaign messaging, it just wasn't a reality back then. Also, those kinds of conversations were seen as indecent in those years, so nobody was going to be talking about stuff like that publicly anyways. However, cut to today, and it's very much a public conversation. So she gives you the introduction, gives you kind of information about abortion and statistics and what it looks like depending on your demographic, whether that's your age, your cultural background, your financial status, what the burden of lack of support puts on people of lower income. And it is this very much stories of abortion that's not trying to give you the horror stories so that you support it because you feel bad for anybody. It's not trying to give you a humanization so that you feel sympathy. It is basically saying that abortion care is medical care. It is a fact of life. As long as there are people who can get pregnant, there will be people who are having abortions. They will either do it legally or illegally. They will either do it safely or unsafely. This is the reality. There should be no judgment. Barriers should not exist, the same way there aren't barriers for other medical care, or there aren't barriers for other non-controversial medical care, because there are barriers for gender reassignment and things like that. And there are financial barriers for family planning if you're not able to naturally have children. She's basically saying the same way that there's no barrier for you to see a chiropractic specialist, there shouldn't be barriers for abortion. Past that introduction, the rest of the stories are individual stories of people's abortion stories, what their background was, was, what the circumstances were for them to obtain the procedure, what the aftermath was, what the rest of their life kind of looked like up until the time of the printing of this story. And they're all different, and every story is unique. Some of it's early on, sometimes the patients are young, some of it's later in a pregnancy and there were medical complications with the fetus, some of it is abuse. Trigger warning, there is talk of abuse, and there are specific explanations of abortion procedures from a medical standpoint. So throughout the stories, Dr. Shaw interjects facts about abortion. So if she's talking about the difficulty of a particular person's story in getting to a place that performs them, she talks about how many facilities have been closed in however many years. She talks about legislation that had been enacted to make it more difficult. And then she also talks about kind of the vilifying of the procedures, and she gets into some explanation about what the procedure actually entails and what is not happening, so people understand that the grotesque horror stories that are being disseminated are false. Now, she does say that she is not going to debate what the beginning of life is. That's a very personal determination based on your culture, your background, multiple factors, and what you believe. What she's saying is that regardless of whatever the start of life is from person to person, she believes that everybody is entitled to abortion care at all times during their pregnancy. There's a story in here of a woman who found out that her baby was going to have one of the trisomy issues, not Down syndrome, but basically something where the baby lived for like a month once it was born. And she decided on an induced abortion because she wanted to hold her baby. So difficult to read about. It made me so sad for her. This is a hard read sometimes, but I think it's such an important one. These are people who are living lives, who are going through things, and abortion is part of their life story. It's just one of the things that they've been through. A couple of quotes, because quoting somebody's individual story just feels intrusive. Like, read the book. But I noted a couple things from some things that Dr. Shaw said. One was what I was just talking about, where she's saying this is not to convince you of the merits of the various reasons why people have abortions. In her words, while the most common reasons for people to choose abortion are concern for limited resources to raise a child, bad timing, partner-related reasons, and a sense of responsibility to others, the purpose of this book is not to substantiate this data. There is no such thing as a good abortion or bad abortion, or someone who is worthy of an abortion or someone who is not. These stories show that people who have abortions are human beings with varied life experiences just like everyone else. The decision to have an abortion doesn't always stem from trauma or turmoil either. Sometimes it's easy and simple. One is not unique because they had an abortion. An abortion does not define someone. It is one event in a person's life. And the other quote that I have is the other point that I was making of they're going to happen regardless. What politicians don't realize is that abortion won't end just because they restrict it. Abortions will continue and they will be forced to occur outside of the medical system. While self-managed abortion, or abortion that is done with pills purchased from an online vendor or friend, has become a recent topic of discussion, people should not have to manage their own abortions because they are unable to access healthcare. And if they choose to manage their own abortion, they should not fear criminalization. So if you're a person who has people in your life who could get pregnant, then you know somebody who's had an abortion. And these are some of their stories. And everybody's stories, I feel like, are valuable. I gave this book 4 pandas. I really enjoyed reading all of these stories of different people and the lives that they were living and their experiences. The only reason why it's not higher, and 4 pandas is still very high, the only reason why it's not higher is that Dr. Shaw was injecting into their stories a lot of really valuable information, but sometimes it just felt repetitive. Sometimes it felt, you know how self-help books sometimes can repeat itself over and over again of like the central points that they're making. That was just happening a few too many times, but overall, really great book. Why should you read it? If you want to read stories about regular people living lives and the things that happen in lives that require us to make a decision that'll send us down one of 2 forks in our road at that point in our life. And for families, because these decisions are not just the pregnant person. This is a partnership. This is affecting multiple people, sometimes an entire family. So you should read it. You should definitely read it. And as an introduction to this topic, it's very, very necessary. She gets into her statistics. She gets into the basics. She explains legislation. She explains political climate. If you want to know what the reality of this topic is, then this is the book for you. All right. So next, we're going to talk about some spells. We're going to get a little witchy. I got this bookmark from Fire. They are the cutest bookstore. They're very community oriented. They have like stitching events, they have yoga events, they have a cookbook club. I love the entire vibe around this place. I wish that they were down here. Not that I live there, but that they were down here. And I think it's one of my favorite bookstores, actually. This book is called Poetry as Spellcasting, and it is such a good introductory to witchy stuff. I bought this one because the cover is beautiful, also very tactile. Something about it, it's very well made. I like it. And I bought it as a bit of like a joke. Not a joke, no. I bought it as a bit of like fluff because I personally don't practice witchery, spells. I'm not a spellcaster. I might even have bought this book for a friend of mine who is definitely a spellcaster. However, that's just not been my bag. But when I was reading this group of books for this video, I have to tell you, I think this was my favorite. Now, it's not actually like a book full of poems / spells. What it ended up being is a bunch of, well, there's some spells in here, but it's primarily like essays that speak about the potency and power of words to be used as rituals and the relationship between poetry and spellcasting. This one is by Tamiko Bayer, Destiny Hempel, and Lisbeth White. And a lot of the contributors to this book are poets. Some, I think they're all poets, but they're very educated poets. So they've been through MFA programs. I don't know if that's all of them, but the language used in here is definitely very advanced language when it comes to the poetic structure and just the structure of writing in general. The relationship between poetry and spellcasting is really easy to understand, and the meeting of those two in this book is very seamless, because if you are a writer, if you're a poet, if you are in the writing tradition at all, you understand the writer's feeling that words are important, words are powerful, and that's basically the core of spellcasting. Now, how they utilize words can be much more symbolic, or words can be a part of a larger ritual that includes other things. However, everything in this book included some kind of wording. They have the essays, and then they have actual rituals that you can practice. And there are rituals around writing. Like the thing that I loved about this book is that it just felt like it was talking about the significance of things in life, or things in your life, around you, nature. I'm going to read you guys what I wrote. It turned out to be a treatise on the power of language and action, and the responsibility we hold to ourselves to honor our work and to represent the voiceless. There were lots of practical rituals, peacemaking, and focus of energy. And I just feel like it's so needed today, right? We focus our energy on so many stupid things. Also, it's coming from a Black, Indigenous, people of color perspective. There's focusing on ancestors, there's focusing on liberation, there's a lot of talk about grief. And in fact, let me read you something that it touched on grief. I did not expect that in here at all. I didn't expect to get so much from this book, honestly. It says, we often can be so swamped by the external demands of life that we become only reactive and continually outward facing. To see what happens when we are still and receptive to our own hearts can feel like a terrifying prospect, but vulnerability is required for both prayer and poetry. In a way, the incoherent space we inhabit during grief is one of great potential. When our sense of self is shaken, we have to imagine new ways of being and relating to the world, but we don't and can't always live in an emotional extremity. And it goes on to say, what other ways can you reach that necessary openness? And there are stories, individual stories of like loss and what that looked like and how they turned to poetry afterwards. There's also some interesting things because, again, it's really more about power and intention and how we are energetic as beings. And if we focus our power and intention, then you get results, whether that's, focusing your time, your power and intention to set a goal that you want to reach, or just a shifting of energy towards something. But there's this little like historical part here that I found so interesting. It's part of a rite of the violet moon, and it gives you ingredients and instructions on how to, I think, do a moon bath. Prior to that, it's talking about the moon's place, and it's talking about the color violet, because again, it's the rite of the violet moon. So it says, violet is a color of light at the shortest wavelength within the visible acuity of the human eye, and lies between blue and invisible ultraviolet on the spectrum. Aboriginal Australians are one of the first cultures to create the pigment using crushed manganese and hematite as colorant for painting the body during ceremonies and medicine making. Tyrian purple, symbolic of wealth, royalty, and the connection to the divine and ecstatic experience, was created by the Phoenicians as early as 1200 BCE from the mucus secretion of the hypobranchial gland of the conch conchineal sea snail. In classical paintings from China, violet represented the transcendence of duality, the uniting principle, creating the ultimate harmony in the universe. I just find it so fascinating. Way before there was, the internet and all this modern stuff, that across the world, there were these beliefs that were shared. How interesting is that? If you don't believe that energy is power, I don't know. How can you not feel like energy is power and be a human being? So I gave this one 4.5 pandas. That's really, really high because it was fantastic. It wasn't perfect in that it's funny how some of these things I think I gave less pandas because they were too simplistic. It's 4.5 pandas for me because I felt like in some spaces it was like a little complicated. If you think that this is going to be like an easy little poetry book, it is not. It is more complicated. It is asking more of you emotionally and mentally than I expected. Great, great read. You should read this if you love words, you love reading about spellcasting. If you are a poet, you should definitely read this. If you want some rituals that you can actually apply in your life to focus your energy and your brain on particular tasks or to refocus on the world around you, on nature, this is a book for you. Okay, since we're talking about witches, we might as well, right? No, we're not talking about witches. We're talking about spellcasters. Not always the same thing. Anyways, this is the only fiction book that I bought from Femfire Books. This one's by Francesca Flores. This would be a good introduction to, girl, I'm not even gonna lie to you. This book was awful. The idea of this book would have been a great introduction to like sapphic romance because it's YA, so it's very uncomplicated romance. There's not a lot of the more adult / spicy things that not everybody loves regardless of who the romantic partners are. But maybe if you wanted to get into sapphic romance and you weren't sure if you were going to like it because it's unfamiliar to you, this would be a good one. It's just two young people that fall in love with each other. And the premise for this book is really good. What could have been done with this book? Also, the cover is amazing. Amazing. This was also before I instituted my reading a few pages before I buy it. However, it might have bamboozled me because the first chapter of this book was actually, I thought I was going to go for a rollicking ride, and it's just the first chapter, and after that, completely ruined. I gave it 1.5 stars. I'm not going to spend too much time on this book because I don't want to be like all, judgmental. I gave it 1.5 pandas. As with all of these, it's 1.5 pandas for me, because I have certain expectations from stories. If you like a very simple story, this might be for you. This book is set in a town, mythological town. It's not based in our world. It's set in a town where witches live openly with human beings because they are the protectors of these human beings from vampires that live in the wood. The vampires are sequestered to the wood by this ancient bone wall that is fallible, and sometimes they get through little spaces in the wall and the vampires attack the villagers, so the witches protect them. There is some commentary about how prior to these vampires coming around, the Empire had been persecuting the witches because they didn't need them. And that's interesting in the sense that Empire will always disregard or harm what they don't need, and then when they need you, all of a sudden, it's a different relationship. The witches are born into their magic, like they usually come from particular types of witches. There are root witches, there are flame witches, I forget what the other kinds are, and open the story on a root witch who is being held in seclusion by her mother because she has been turned into a vampire, and her mother also a vampire. You don't know in the beginning how either of them came to be vampires. They're turned in the usual way of being bitten by a vampire. However, a witch only retains her witch powers as a vampire if she's bitten within this very particular 1 or 2 years of her life when her witch powers are at their most potent. So her mother was bitten as an adult. She is no longer a witch. The daughter was bitten during this time. She is also a witch. If you were ever a witch, you can siphon off a witch's power by touching them. So the mother is saying that she's keeping her in seclusion for her own safety, but she's actually siphoning off her witch abilities so that her mom can still live in this town and pretend like she's just a witch and that she's not a vampire. The story is kind of a, what is that, Rapunzel? Let down your hair. She also has very long hair. And it's the story of her escape and kind of this climactic facing off between the witches and the vampires. Sounds like it could be a really good story. story. It was just super easily resolved. The characters ended up being like very cartoonish. The parents were like wildly cruel, and the structuring of the story was something I actually haven't encountered before. I've read a lot. So I've read my fair share of things that make a story clunky and it takes you out of the story, where you start to pay attention to the writing and you're like, what? But this that I encountered with this book, I have never encountered before. So this author had a habit of having her characters go through like inner monologue about things that were troubling them or points that she was trying to make in the story during really harrowing times in a way that made no sense. Like somebody's trying to stab you to death and you're thinking about whether or not the person you likes you back, and did he look at you that way, or you're not thinking about that when somebody's trying to stab you. I'm sorry, that's not when you're thinking about that. Like you usually place things like that when somebody's falling asleep and their thoughts wander off, or if they're like maybe traveling and you're sitting next to each other and you're contemplating things. There are particular ways that action kind of shows up, and the way she does it. I'm going to give you guys a quick example because again, I don't want to just make fun of this book, but she has been caught in a silver net. The vampire witch has been caught in a silver net that is painful to her, and the girl that she kind of nemesis, kind of old friend, kind of she's in love with her, has been dragged into the trees. It says her muffled screams are still ringing in her ears. Okay, this is the violence of this scene. Her thoughts start at the fact that she's confined like she had been before. Oh no, that's natural. What are they going to do with the person who just got dragged away? Tries to struggle, and then she says, my heart breaks at the way she accused me of killing her mother. She thought something so terrible of me for 2 years. I can't imagine how much resentment she built up in that time. Kaluna, the person who was dragged away, his mother, she was always kind to me, practically like a second mother. I never would have hurt her. How is this what you're thinking about? Another one. She's running for her life. There's an all-out clash. There are vampires, fire witches fighting it out to the death, people running everywhere, and she's having a full-on flashback of all of her years in confinement. Goes from the amount of time that they gave her blood to how they had strapped her down to her feelings of ambivalence for her mother. Why does everyone try to control me? Why does everyone think they have a say in what I do? Is it because I'm a young girl who could be powerful if she only knew how to wield her weapons, her voice? Kay's young and determined too, but she's had freedom she takes for granted, a life I'll never know. Running for her life. Anyways, so if you want to take a chance. So from here, on camera at least, it looks like it says why I'm no longer talking about race. In person, it's very obvious. This part in the middle, there you go, to white people. Why I'm no longer talking to white people about race. Very controversial. And the play, like what they did with this white background, was ingenious. At the very least, you're going to pick it up and say, what is this about, right? Which is what I did in that story. This book was by Rainy Ito Lodge. Don't usually like kind of like a explainer on race type book. A bit too far down my race studies journey to want somebody to explain something so simplistic. So I tend to consume my race topic books either through memoir or in essays or via a particular topic. This one technically falls into that last category because this is written by a British person who details kind of the relationship with race that exists in Britain. And I said to myself, I don't know much about that. And it must be because I'm American. However, the author argues that the main black and white race topic conversation that happens in the world is based off of the history of America. And having grown up in Britain as a black person, their experience with race narratives were all from America, that it was Martin Luther King Jr. and it was Rosa Parks and it was the Underground Railroad, and how very little this conversation was happening in the UK, and how she didn't understand why that was when black people had been there for millennia. Is that millennia at this point? For a really long time. And so she opens up with recounting some of the encounters with race and issues with race that have happened over the last few hundred years. And there was stuff that I didn't know about. There was a lot that I didn't know about in more recent politics, right? Because I live here. I don't know about what's going on there. And what was startling was that there's a whole like group of Brits whose argument for decreasing increasing immigration of all non-original British people is one of nativism, which is one of indigenousness, which I find fascinating because I guess the argument is kind of like, we're British and this was our original land. And if we want you, others, to stop occupying our land, how is that any different than if the Native Americans in the United States said, I want you to stop occupying my land? You would support that. And while theoretically that is an argument, it becomes complicated by the massive history of colonization that this particular island has engaged in. Okay, like you can't go to all these countries and ruin them and take all of the possible resources that you can and embed British companies that still make money off of them to this day while keeping most of their indigenous inhabitants poverty, and then say, but I don't want y'all coming back to my house. Also, there's a large percentage of people of color who were invited back to your house back when you needed laborers. So everybody who was a part of the Commonwealth had dual citizenship with their country and the UK. But now when they don't need that same quantity of peoples, or now when they see that there's too many, perhaps, now you have a different tale to tell. But I found that argument so startling, I guess, because nobody in America would dare say something like that. But I guess because, they are indigenous to their land, they feel like they can. Wild. I gave this one 3.5 pandas. It was a good book. I learned some things that I did not know, especially, like I said, about more modern politics. And I definitely didn't know about some of that with migration. And I'm really mostly what I feel like gets disseminated over here about the certain circumstance of race in Britain is more around their anti-immigration policy. But she says, if you look in popular cultural things, there's never a retelling of any brown stories. There's never retelling of any black stories. It's like Jane Austen and what's the other one? It's Jane Austen and Charles Dickens and just very white, as if the black people were not there the whole time. I gave it 3.5 pandas because it was a really good book. However, this also has the same problem that You're the Only One I've Told had, in that sometimes it gets too simplistic. So it's 3.5 pandas for me. If you want a starter book about race relationships and the convergence of race and class and race and feminism and what that looks like in a mostly white society and the hurdles that Black people face in those societies and structural racism, and it's really good at explaining all of those topics. It's a very good starter feminist work on race in the UK. You should read this if you are looking for a starter conversation, or if, like this author and like me, you don't know anything about the Black experience in the UK and you want to know more about it. I definitely enjoyed learning as much as I did from this work. And this also took place during the time of Brexit and the far right movements that were going on and how that was affecting Black people's lives in the UK at that time. So if you want a kind of overall picture of maybe the last 100 years of the Black experience in the UK, I think this, again, is a really good reference. All right, we've made it to the last, but certainly not least. This book is called Demystifying Sharia. What it is, how it works, and why it's not taking over our country. It is by Sumbul Ali Karamali. I love Femfire Books curation. Let me start there. That all these live inside of that store is amazing. But it's not just books about brown people, it's books by brown people. I love it. Demystifying Sharia. I'm going to insert a little clip of our forever president, Mr. Obama, talking about Sharia in his final, I believe it was his final correspondence dinner speech. Well, I guess for a period of years there, Sharia law was all over the news cycle. There was a person who was basically lobbying for different states to enact laws that said that they would not allow Sharia to become a guiding principle in their state's laws. This was very much a fear of a Muslim world type move. This was to sow negative feelings towards Muslims, obviously, because Sharia comes from the Islamic faith. And it was completely pointless because we have very strict laws and something somewhere in the Constitution that talks about separation of church and state. Now, while today in 2025, there are definitely some politicians who are trying to blur those lines in favor of sprinkling a little Christianity onto our school system, the reality is it's illegal, and it's what this country was founded on, the separation of church and state. If we know our American history, then we understand that the Pilgrims originally came over here because they were escaping religious persecution, and they wanted to create a land, and eventually did create a land, in which you could practice whatever religion you so chose and whatever it looked like. Now, have we found other insidious ways to persecute people for their religion? Yes. But there has been no religion since the founding of this country that has been embedded in any sort of legislative policy. When I saw this book, I said, I don't know what Sharia is. I would like to understand. Also, I have always, because again, when you just rely on the news cycle, I have always felt like I don't know enough about Islam to really understand what's gone on. I have not understood the Sunni, Shia, jihadist terminology that the American news has used in abundance throughout much of my adult life since 9/11. I was a junior in high school back during the fall of the Twin Towers. And following that, there was all of this news coverage about the situation in Iraq, in Afghanistan, the factions that existed, and the players that were targeted or involved. And there was always a sector of religious affiliation that was tied to individual people. It's the same way that I really did not understand the Jewish-Palestinian relationship. And I mean all of this from a historical context. Like, do I understand the things that are happening today? Yes. But the references that people make are to this like decades, if not centuries old division or circumstance, or like you're referring back to something that is like year 245. I don't know that history. And I really don't like when I don't understand something fully. And so I want to understand. So I saw this book and I said, I want to be demystified. And what I love about this book, what did I give it? Let's find it. I gave it 4 pandas. What I loved about this book is that it is a very beginner's level explanation, that felt like a long word for that moment, of the Islamic faith and the different groups of peoples. It gave so many definitions. And I know that it's all surface level because this book is only 216 pages. So there's no way. And by the way, when I do page count, I'm not counting like the notes section. I'm counting like the stuff that you're going to read. There's no way that one of the oldest religions in the world is going to be explained fully, including their society and all political interests and what the modern climate that exists across multiple countries is in 200 pages. What I'm saying is, if you don't know anything about the Islamic faith, or all you know is the stuff that are particular words that you have heard throughout your life, that you don't have any real relationship with the Islamic tradition or its background at all, this is a fantastic starter story. It's this fantastic feminist beginning tract to help you understand the Islamic structure and what the relationship is of that Islamic structure, because that's a religious structure, to government and politics in different places today. Honestly, I wish something like this existed for every religion. Like, I want to understand the history of Christianity. I want to understand the history of Buddhism. I want the whole story. Maybe not all of the details, but I want a simplified version of the story so that I can understand how it appears. Catholicism, I mean, that's so complicated with all of the popes and all their individual stories. I don't know if you can siphon that down, but to make it easier to understand what these things look like today, I would like a little bit of a dictionary, essay dictionary. Somebody, I think, has done that, probably for all those religions, but I want it like this one because this is a good one. Now, she also has other books. One I think is The Muslim Next Door, The Quran, the Media, and That Veil Thing, and then Growing Up Muslim, Understanding the Beliefs and Practices of Islam. So at some point, I do want to read some of her other books because I feel like it'll give me an even more comprehensive understanding of what she talks about in here. So I gave this 4 pandas because the framework is fantastic. How far back she goes to the very beginning. It's amazing. The breakdown of things, the amount of things that I highlighted in this book, I have not highlighted this much in any book because I was like, oh, oh, now I understand this and that and that and that. And I would have to refer back to it because there's a lot of different terms. And then I kind of get them mixed up a little bit. It's for pandas for a reason. It's a really, really, really good read. Only reason why it's not higher is that it's for pandas for me. So there's a bit of an oversimplification at times, not an oversimplification. There's a bit of a repetitive attempt at wanting people to understand, like providing a frame of reference that people can relate to. And so there's a lot of this is what actually happened involving these maybe bad actors, or this is what happened in this particular circumstance with these particular Islamic peoples. It does not represent all people who are Islamic. The same way when certain Christian bad actors do XYZ, it does not represent all Christians. The same way when X ethnicity does something, it does not represent all people in that ethnicity. I understand why she does it. There are people who are beginning to have these conversations with this book. There are people who are beginning to understand worlds outside of themselves with this book who need those repeated references. There are hate groups who claim Christianity who are not representative of all Christianity. That's very obvious, I feel like. However, there are people who are not making those connections and those comparisons, obviously, because they are believing some of these stories of all Muslim people. And so I get why she does it. It's just for me in particular, I do understand those things. I've been reading more of these kinds of stories for a long time, and it just happens very often. I don't know how valuable that is for me, but otherwise, fantastic read. Why you should read this. If you're walking around life hearing about, Muslims doing things and you don't get it, read this book so you can understand. Understanding is the beginning. That is what all feminism is. It is a doorway into understanding something you're unfamiliar with so that you can make judgments, decisions about the people around you and in the world. We are much better to one another if we understand each other better. And we are much better to people if we understand systems better, if we understand the need of dismantling systems or the abuse that certain systems have been allowed to perpetuate, especially for long periods of time. Things I did not know, I made a note. Things I did not know, and I put down page 21, 25, 27, 29, 31, 33, 36, 37, 38, 39, 46, 48, 49, 51, 56, 58, 71, 72. This is full of things you do not know. Read it. You will know them and you will love it. We're done for today. We've reached the end of the road. If you woke up today and you said, I want to understand feminism better. I want to read some books so I can learn some things. I hope this video started you on that journey and you said, I'm going to try one of these books. If you said, would really love, as a person who lives in the South, if there was a feminist bookstore for me and you happen to live in or near Jacksonville, guess what? There is one for you. It's called Femfire Books. My next video, what's my next video? Let's check. Shall we? Let's check the magical calendar. The next video is books that feel like summer. This video was very multicultural, multinational, peoples of color. And my next video is going to be books that feel like summer, girl friendship edition. And it's going to get very European. No, well, they're Italians. Yeah, European. We talk about everybody around here. And I grew up a Florida girl in the 90s in the United States of America. And so there is a smorgasbord of American cultural things that I still love. So I'm going to talk about them. Judy Blume, author that I love with my whole heart. And we're going to talk about her in the next video. And you guys are going to love it. There's actually a movie on Netflix where they flipped one of Judy Blume's books called Forever. I have it back there. They flipped this book and cast it as a black family instead of a white family. And people have been loving it. So I have to watch it. I still haven't watched it. So that's the next one. And you guys are going to come back and you're going to like and you're going to subscribe. My last video was multicultural, multinational. If you like the everybody's, if you like talking about the everybody's, watch that one. I liked it. I really like the light coming in at my window. We went from the last video being insane lighting to this one being like amazing lighting. So I hope you guys really enjoyed that because I did it for you because I love you guys. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye, book friends.